Yes, you read that right. We've only been in Parliament for 1 week, and there's already a bill tabled in the Senate to lower the voting age from 18 and down to 16 because our youth care so much about our politics in this country. They're so important. They are so well informed that they need a seat at the table to be able to say who is going to represent them. And we're going to talk about where's this coming from? Does this have any legs? And, well, how can you combat it? Welcome to the LA Podcast. I'm your host, Josh. I'm grateful to have you on with me. If you find any value from this video, if you are interested in what we're talking about, you like what this is all about, feel free to like this video. If you haven't already, subscribe if you can. It really helps. And share this video because it really helps get the voice out there. That's just a different voice from what mainstream media is currently offering. Love having you with me. Let's get into the first story. So Bill S222, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act and the regulation adapting the Canada Elections Act for the purposes of a referendum. Persons qualified as electors. Every person who is a Canadian citizen and is 16 years of age or older on polling day is qualified as an elector, and this is a bill that is now being pushed in the Senate. It's officially been tabled for first reading. Obviously, this bill has a long ways to go. Obviously, there's going to be some, hopefully you hope that there's going to be some people opposing this bill, and it's going to have a lot of scrutiny on it. But it doesn't change the fact that this bill still has a lot of support. The fact this has been tabled by a senator in the first place, well, is concerning enough. And this bill was actually tabled in the last parliament as well, back in 2020, 2021. By the same senator, who believes and has been advocating for the fact that 16-year-olds should have the right to vote here in this country. They know so much. They know what they're doing. They have a better idea of civics than the regular adult here in this country. So we should let them vote. Let them have a voice. Let them have a voice. And this was a fascinating story because there is such an interesting debate around it, right? Well, you know, the voting age is 18. 1970, it used to be 21, then lowered to 18 in 1970. What will it take to lower it again? What are we going to do? And then you have the other side of the argument. It's like, okay, if you keep lowering it, what? Now we're going to have 10-year-olds voting? Like, what are we doing here? If you're going to keep doing that, at some point in time, I'm guessing you can keep making the same reasoning and same statements that an 8-year-old at some point should be able to vote. So we're going to read this article of the senator who's pushing it and giving her reasonings of why she's trying to push it. And, well, we're going to do some of this. We're going to poke some holes in this and figure out where this motivation is truly coming from. This is from Radio Canada, CBC, from May of 2020, so almost exactly 5 years ago now. Why the senator thinks Canadians should start voting at 16. Senator Marilou McPhedran says she knows a great way to strengthen democracy in Canada. Let 16-year-olds vote in federal elections. And she plans on tabling a bill as soon as Parliament returns in regular sittings. The legal voting age in Canada was lowered from 21 to 18 in 1970. Since then, there have been multiple attempts to lower it again. Both former Green Party leader Elizabeth May and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh promised if they were elected, and there's been efforts on the municipal level in provinces like BC and Alberta. The most common argument against lowering the age is that teenagers just aren't mature enough and aren't capable, and neither is the person writing this article being capable of writing the word capable of making political decisions. McPhedran says it's just not true, and she's launched a campaign to hear from teens. The Manitoba senator told As It Happens host Carol how her youth advisors, the Canadian Council of Young Feminists, helped change her mind. And this was part of the conversation. But that's kind of how it's starting. You had a group of advocates. You had a young group of advocates and people who are pushing for change. Help change her mind. The young feminists help change her mind. Well, it seems obviously, we're talking politics here, but seems like a politically motivated group who helped change her mind that, we need to be able to vote at 16. Fascinating. And there's points in this where it is interesting. Elizabeth May, Jagmeet Singh had voiced that they are interested in bringing down the voting age. Why would they want that? Is a question that people have. Why were they the only politicians advocating for lowering the voting age? Well, is it because it would benefit their parties? Maybe. A lot of arguments people are going to make is that, well, she said it here, 16-year-olds just aren't mature enough. And I know people listening to the show are going to say, well, they're just low information voters. NDP and the Green Party just rely on low information voters because their policies are terrible, and they're going to rely on people who don't really know a whole lot to vote for them. And that I would actually push back on. The thing that is happening here in our country is, well, our schooling, our education institutions have been captured or at least heavily favor a specific political ideology that's being pushed in these schools. So of course, typically, students are only hearing one side of the argument. Typically, students aren't hearing the conservative side of things. They really are only hearing the left side of things. So if you are preaching one thing in these schools and one thing only, then of course they're the ones who are going to be like, yeah, of course I'd vote for a Jagmeet Singh. Or in this case, well, not anymore. But of course I'd vote for an Elizabeth May. They're the good guys. They believe in lefty policies. They're the good guys. They're the people I need to vote for. Of course they would want to lower the voting age to 16. I think these students, these kids, 16 years of age, they actually have a lot of information. The problem is the information that they have is highly propagandized and highly slanted towards a specific viewpoint. When you look in the questions of this article, that's where, and the answers the senator gives, it tells you, well, exactly everything you need to know. Why should 16-year-olds be able to vote in federal elections, they asked. And the senator said, the research shows us that Canadians, the research shows us, she says, the research shows us that Canadians can vote. When it's clear that they've started voting early, they stay engaged and they continue to be voters. Oh, okay. You tell me about that. And I personally, and I know this is shared by many, have some real concerns about the vitality of our democracy. And this is a very solid way of strengthening our democracy here in Canada, she says. And the reporter asked, I've seen these survey studies that show that if they vote for the first time when they're young, they continue to vote. But if they don't vote when they're 18, why would they vote when they're 16? I think there are many reasons for that, man. I'm really giving you reasons that come from the youth advisors that are working with me on this project and on this new bill. And one of them is the 16-year-olds, for the most part, are still deeply engaged in the education system, and they're reachable in a way that many 18-year-olds are not necessarily. The level of interest is very high. In Scotland, when they ran a referendum, before they did lower the voting age to 16, they had a 75% turnout among young people for that referendum. Not really giving any real reasons. It's been, well, I have a bunch of 16-year-olds telling me that they want to vote. Okay. We have research that says if you vote at 16 that you'll stick around. You'll vote again. Okay. I would love to see the research. But this is how they work. They use words like research and science and bring forward just crap information, crap stats, things that are very politically motivated. Well, we have research, and the research comes from the 16-year-olds I've been working with on this. Okay. Well, how about the 35-year-old? Have you been working with a 35-year-old on this? Have you been actually working with true social scientists? Have you been working with any type of statisticians at all? Like, are you working with anybody actually experts, or are you just working with a bunch of group of 16-year-olds that say, I want to vote, and Jagmeet Singh supports me? Is that what's happening here? That's how it feels. Well, the reporter asked that very question. Says, you mentioned your youth advisor group and you have this thing called the Canadian Council for Young Feminists. What are they telling you as to why they want to be able to vote at the age of 16? And well, the senator answered, said, before you called, I was actually reading a paper written by a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old on this exact question, part of a whole network of UNESCO's school students. And one of the points that they made in the paper was to say, look, we have a killing machine that we drive at the age of 16. We can enroll in the armed forces when we're 16, and we can be sent off to fight at the age of 17. There are all kinds of indicators that as one of them said, age does not mean wisdom, that we have a whole range of kinds of people who are already voting. Some of them engaged, and some of them thoughtful, and some of them not at all. But again, it comes back down to they keep asking the question, who are you talking to? Who's advising you on this? And it's like, oh, I'm talking to a bunch of 15, 16-year-olds. And sure, that's cool. Like, they brought forward literature that they are engaged. Okay, cool. How about just getting these kids involved and actually engaged in civic classes that are actually properly taught versus just trying to lower the voting age because it's politically convenient for specific parties? And this is the part of the article that really upset me the most, and I'll show you what I mean, is the last question here. It tells you everything you know about this whole senator's motivations. The biggest argument that people give as to why young people that age shouldn't be voting is that their brains aren't developed enough, that they're not mature, they don't have the knowledge, the capacity to make good political choices. What do your young people say to those arguments? And baby, buckle up, because this is exactly what you think this answer is going to be. The senator responds to this saying, as one of them said, doesn't that sound an awful like what they used to say about women and how women couldn't vote? Yep. Identity politics coming in hot on this one, boys. That's just ridiculous. Stereotyping that really is not borne out by the evidence that's available. It's not that long ago that we changed it. We went from 21 to 18, and exactly those same arguments were made then, and it's been good. It's been a good inclusion for our democracy and for Canadian society. And I would argue exactly the same thing for the benefits of inclusion, engagement, and mobilization for 16-year-olds in this country, and that's how that ends. Well, they said the same thing about the suffrage movement. Women couldn't vote because they weren't mature enough, and they made the same arguments. Did they? Maybe. Two very different things, though. One, we actually cast out a whole segment of society. Because, yeah, we didn't value education for women, sure. But we have science that backs us up that your brain's not fully developed until you're 25. So actually, let's make the voting age 25 while we're at it. This is where it gets frustrating. Because, well, we have a senator who fought back on this as well in the last parliament. And it was Honorable Donald Neil Platt who brought this forward. He says, I also believe in our youth being involved in politics and political campaigns. I was a member of the Conservative Party at a young age and was only 15 years old when I volunteered for the first time in an election campaign as a scrutineer for a longtime member of Parliament, the Honorable Jake Epp. My dad got me involved in that campaign and subsequent campaigns. These were formative experiences for me, and through them, I developed a keen interest in politics and public service. However, colleagues, in spite of my support for our young people and my clear recognition of the valuable contributions they make, this is not the equivalent of saying they should have all the rights and responsibilities that currently belong to adults who are at the age of majority. We have many things that are restricted by age, and I would not note that all those restrictions have been determined by the democratic process, which is controlled by those who are voting age. If we reduce the voting age from 18 to 16, how can we prohibit 16-year-olds from also purchasing alcohol, tobacco, and cannabis? What about firearms? What about gambling? If you're old enough to decide who should be the Prime Minister of Canada, aren't you old enough to have these things as well? What about running for public office? If you can vote in an election, shouldn't you be able to run an election? Do we believe that all 16-year-olds are ready to shoulder the weight of and responsibilities that come with public office? And I understand that this is the typical pushback you're going to get from the other side on this. This is where I think conservatives and people who are in disagreement with the left pushing the way they do get into trouble because they try to take the middle ground approach and say, well, doesn't make any sense because this isn't this. It's like, no. They want to go extremes. You have to go back to the other side then. All right, you want to try and bring the age down to 16? Okay. How about this? We want to put it back up to 21. How about you table a bill saying we want to increase the age of voting to 21 and make all the same arguments? That's how conservatives actually should be reacting to this from my perspective. Instead of trying to hold on to what's current and then them pulling you further left, that's how we got here in the first place. How about think, okay, you want to play this game? Sure. We're going to table a bill that we want to increase at 21. Actually, quite frankly, our brains aren't even fully developed to 25. Actually, let's make voting age 25. You have all the science on your side at that point. Obviously, it's not going to be very popular. However, it just needs to pass in the House. What's it going to take? Because that would be conservatives actually trying to conserve something. Obviously, there's arguments for both ways. Like you got to have a more political way of doing it. I get it. But that's just kind of my perspective on this. If they want to push so hard to bring down the age of voting because it's politically convenient for them, all right, then let's bring it up to 25. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the science behind it at that point. But this is the thing. It goes so far beyond all this, right? The issue is we're seeing people not being able to get jobs. So our young people aren't being able to get jobs, not going to be able to get homes, not being able to start families because it's too expensive, not being able to do the transitions in life, leading to a population that is becoming less and less mature because they're not hitting the huge cultural milestones that generations before them have hit at earlier points in their lives. It made me think of this Time article. It says, teens today are having sex, dating, and drinking less than they used to. Well, quite frankly, I hate the title of this article. It's quite frankly stupid. However, if you get down to the article itself, you'll see what I mean. Contrary to popular belief, today's kids are not growing up too fast. According to a new study published in the Journal of Child Development, they're growing up slower than they used to. The researchers analyzed survey responses from 8.3 million adolescents ages 13 to 19 from across the country over the last 40 years. They found that today's youths, compared to those in previous decades, are less likely to engage in adult activities, including drinking alcohol, dating, having sex, going out without their parents, driving a car, and working a job. Those last few ones are the ones that really caught my attention. Sure, drinking alcohol, having sex, that's stupid. I think it's a stupid culture we have in general. But doing things without their parents, driving a car, working a job, like they're hitting those milestones less and less at later and later points in their life. Today, the researchers say 18-year-olds act more like 15-year-olds from previous decades. That was true across all demographic groups in that study. The new findings are consistent with other recent research, and they tell a complicated story of teens today. Some people have written that alcohol use and sexuality are down, so that must mean that teens are more virtuous than they used to be, says lead author Gene Twenge, professor of psychology at San Diego State University. Others wrote that they're less likely to have jobs, so they must be lazy or immature. If you look at the big picture, it's not that they're doing more good things or more bad things overall, says Twenge. It's just that they're less likely to do all kinds of things that adults do, and there's definitely a trade-off there. One downside to a slower development is that teens may be unprepared for living independently when they go off to college, get their first job, or set out on their own, Twenge says. But there are also plenty of benefits, especially for teens' health. When kids don't grow up before they're ready, they're protected from things like alcohol and sex, says Twenge. But this is a great point, because everything they hit here is similar things that Stats Canada has been seeing as well. Our youth are hitting milestones further on in life in their development than previous generations did. They're maturing at a slower rate. So lowering the age to 16, not going to be a good thing. And quite frankly, this supports the fact that maybe we should bump it up to 25 since we're struggling with the maturity these days. And I don't fully put it on the generations. I put it on their parents for one, but then also two, I put it on our system. As I said to start off, when things become unaffordable, you can't find a summer job. Gas is too expensive to put in your car, so you don't want to drive a car. You can't afford to live out on your own. Like, all these things are inhibitors to young people because they're just too expensive and the economy is so bad. That's why we're seeing such a slow in development. That on top of poor parenting, that on top of poor societal values, there's a lot of compounding factors there. So lowering the age of 16 is a bad idea, and this bill should be fought every step of the way. So here, this is a study that came from the early 2000s. On average, a 25-year-old in 2001 had gone through the same number of transitions as a 22-year-old in 1971. And a 30-year-old in 2001 had made the same number of transitions as a 25-year-old in 1971. This suggests that the path to adulthood is no longer as straight as it was back in 1971. In fact, you could say the transitions of today's young adults are both delayed and elongated. Delayed because young adults take more time to complete their first major transition, leaving school, thus postponing all subsequent transitions, and elongated because each subsequent transition takes longer to complete and stretches the process from their late teens to their early 30s. And this was an issue in 2001, and it's a trend they've been tracking since 1971. Well, it says here in the 2021 census data, it says the census indicates that the proportion of young adults living with their parents remained steady at 35% between 2016 and 2021, suggesting a continued trend of delayed independence. And then to add to that, post-secondary attainment report says recent analyses show that young adults are achieving more levels of education, which may contribute to delayed entry into the workforce and other adult roles. We're seeing people just sticking around university more and more because, well, there's a conglomerate of reasons. There's people who want to be doctors. That's one thing. But then there's the other reason is like, well, I can't get a job, so I'll just stay in school. Or two, there's an increased level of anxiety in youth these days due to things like social media, tech, this, that, the other, and they just don't want to leave and they want to be a kid forever. We are infantilizing our children. These liberal policies and the policy we've seen over the past 10 years is not helping our youth to mature and grow and be contributing members of society. We're putting roadblocks in front of them every step of the way and then also treating them as such. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. It's all good. No. It's not all good. And you can't, not only so it's all good, you also tell them, you gaslight them saying it's not really an issue. Our youth are suffering. It needs to be talked about. Our youth are suffering. Something needs to be done about it. Enough is enough with the nonsense. The solution isn't lowering the age of 16. The solution is getting the heck out of the way and letting our teens grow up. And also having parenting associated with that forces our teens to grow up. I work and I volunteer quite a lot in youth sports. And you can tell the kids who have good parents at home who get out of the way, parents who aren't afraid to push their kids to try things, aren't afraid to get their kids in the mix. And then there's the other parents who get in the way, who don't want their kids to go through too much hard stuff. And you can tell in the development of the kids is far different. But this is what the government wants. This is what a liberal government wants. This is a good thing. The more immature the youth become as preceding generations go through, the more dependent and more willing they're going to be to want to rely on the government. And that's how all this goes. I've seen it when I work with youth. When you force a kid who has been sheltered, when you force a kid who has been smothered by parenting to try and do something on their own, they crumble in a lot of cases. and they desire that smothering once again because it's just too scary out there. So when you start doing that on scale by manipulating the economy so that people can't grow up, of course they're just going to rely on the government. And that's where we're currently going. That's why I'm a strong advocate of pushing back on this bill. I'm a strong advocate to make sure this goes nowhere. We'll be tracking it, we'll be following it, but it's time to get our government out of the way, fix what's been broken, and allow our kids to grow up and be kids again so they can be great, mature adults who give so much more to society and help the next generation grow. But anyways, have yourselves a good one. I'm out.